In Allentown, Pennsylvania, there was a sound men set their watches by. The low diesel cough of a Mack truck firing up in the cold, and the shift whistle that called 18,000 people through the gates of a factory that sprawled across 47 acres. For most of a century, the bulldog on the hood of those trucks was not just a mascot. It was a promise. This machine is tougher than you are. Mack Trucks hauled artillery through the mud of 2 world wars. They climbed the Burma Road. They built the highways they would later run on. And then, on a Wednesday in 1987, the last truck rolled off the Allentown line without a band, without a speech, without anyone outside the plant much noticing. The bulldog had barked for 100 years. What people remember is the silence that came after. Here is the part that still stings for the men who gave that factory their working lives. Mack did not die because it forgot how to build a great truck. It built the best heavy trucks in America, trucks so durable that customers ran them for 1,000,000 miles and then sold them to a second owner who ran them another decade. Mack died because it kept winning the last war while the world fought a new one. The story of how that happened starts long before the trucks in a coal town with a boy who went underground at 12 and decided somewhere in the dark that he would spend his life building things that did not break. John Mack was born in 1864 near Scranton, Pennsylvania, the eldest of 7 children in a family that spoke more German than English at the supper table. His father worked the coal mines. By the time John was 12, he was working beside him, hauling ore cars through tunnels that collapsed often enough that every family in the valley had buried someone. He lasted 3 years underground. Then his father was crushed between 2 rail cars, lingered 6 months unable to work, and died owing more to the company store than the family could ever repay. John was 15. He walked to the wagon district in Scranton and apprenticed himself to a wheelwright who paid him in meals and a corner of the workshop floor to sleep on. He learned fast, and he learned more than the trade. Not just how to bend wood and forge iron, but why a machine broke, and what made one design stronger than another. When the old wheelwright died, the shop went to a nephew from the old country. John got nothing but a reputation. He could fix anything with wheels on it. In 1893, he moved to Brooklyn with his younger brother Augustus and opened a wagon repair business in a building that had been a stable. It still smelled of horses. What they also had, though they could not have named it, was timing. Brooklyn in the 1890s was beautiful chaos. 500,000 people crammed into streets laid out for a fraction of that. Factories rising every month, freight moving faster than horses and wagons could carry it, and everything breaking under the strain. The Mack brothers fixed what broke. Within a year, 3 more brothers joined them, and there were 5 of them under one roof, all able to work 16-hour days without complaint, because they had all seen the alternative, and the alternative was the mine. Soon, they were not just repairing wagons. They were building them custom to order. If a brewer asked for a dray that could carry 6 tons, the Macks built one that could carry 8. Word got around. John Mack, though, was already looking past the horse. He had seen the early automobiles, crude, smoking, unreliable things that caught fire or simply stopped for no reason anyone could explain. Most wagon builders looked at them and saw toys for rich men. John looked at them and saw the future arriving faster than anyone wanted to admit. In 1900, the brothers bolted a gasoline engine to a chassis and built a motor bus, a 20-seat machine for sightseeing. The first test drive lasted barely a city block before something broke. They fixed it. The bus they finally delivered ran tourists through Prospect Park for 8 years before it was worn down and converted into a truck. That was the company, in one machine. Built so well it outlived its own purpose. That same year, 1900, they formally founded the Mack Brothers Company. The market they were betting on barely existed. Most cities had no paved roads. Gasoline was sold in 1-gallon tins at the pharmacy. But John Mack had a simple philosophy that would define the company for a century. If you are good enough, customers will find you. If you are not, nothing else matters. By 1905, Brooklyn had grown too small and too expensive, and they went looking for room. They found it in Allentown, Pennsylvania. cheap land, railroads, coal and steel nearby, and a workforce of German and Pennsylvania Dutch men who knew metal and had a reputation for showing up on time. The Macks built the factory there and moved the whole operation south. It was the marriage that would define both the company and the city for the next 80 years. The trucks earned their reputation the hard way, in war. When the First World War came, the British Army needed trucks that could haul guns and ammunition through mud that drowned horses, driven by soldiers who had never operated anything motorized in their lives. They tested the American makers and found most of them wanting. Engines that overheated, frames that cracked, transmissions that failed under load. Mack Trucks kept running. British soldiers gave the blunt-nosed, heavy Mack model a nickname that would outlive everyone who first said it. They called it the bulldog. It was not marketing. It was a verdict from men whose lives depended on the machine. The truck that earned the name was the Mack Model AC, a chain-driven machine with a blunt sloping hood that looked, head-on, like a dog with its shoulders set to charge. The British ordered them by the hundreds, and then by the thousands, drove them through artillery mud that swallowed horses, whole-loaded them far past any sane limit because armies do not read the recommended payload, and ran them for days without maintenance because there was no time to stop. And the trucks kept working. When the United States entered the war, the American Expeditionary Force ordered them too. By the end of the fighting, the Bulldog was no longer a Brooklyn nickname. It was a reputation stamped into the memory of every army that had used one. That nickname did not become the hood ornament for another 15 years, and the way it happened says everything about the company. In 1932, Mack's chief engineer, a man named Alfred Missouri, was laid up in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. To pass the time, he took a bar of soap and carved a small bulldog by hand. He patented it that October, and the casting began appearing on the hoods of Mack trucks the next year. Missouri himself did not live to see it ride very far. He died in 1933 in the crash of the Navy airship Akron. But the dog he whittled out of soap in a hospital bed became one of the most recognized symbols in American industry, and it meant exactly what those British soldiers had meant. This thing does not quit. Between the wars, the company learned the other half of its character, the hard half. When the stock market collapsed in 1929, freight shipping fell by half inside a year, and truck sales fell further still. Of the more than 200 truck makers that had crowded the American market in the boom, fewer than 30 were still standing by the middle of the 1930s. Mack was one of them. It survived the way it always had, by building trucks that ran when other trucks did not, and by learning to operate lean, to watch its inventory, to never assume that tomorrow would look like today. The Depression nearly killed it. What it did instead was teach the company a discipline that would carry it through the war that came next. By the time the Second World War came, Mack was no longer a niche maker. It retooled the entire Allentown plant for the military and built rugged six-wheel drive trucks that could pull artillery through anything. More than 35,000 Mack vehicles went to the Allied forces. They hauled supplies over the Burma Road, carried ammunition through the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, and moved wounded men off the beaches at Normandy. Inside the Allentown plant, the assembly lines ran around the clock, and for the first time, women in large numbers stood at the drill presses and welded the chassis together. Rosie the Riveter was not a poster in Allentown. She was the woman next door, home by dawn with metal dust in her hair. When the war ended, Mack was not just another truck company. It was the truck company, the brand that had powered 2 world wars, and the Bulldog was no longer a mascot. It was a symbol of American industrial muscle. And unlike the end of the First War, this time, Mack was ready for peace. The company had spent the war years quietly designing the trucks the post-war boom would need, and the boom came exactly as John Mack had taught them to expect. Soldiers came home, got married, bought houses, started hauling businesses. The interstate highways were coming. Freight was about to move by truck as never before, and Mack was built to carry it. Through the 1950s, the company introduced model after model, each one better than the last, and the Bulldog cab became the signature shape of American hauling. The B Series, introduced in 1953, was the truck people pictured when they pictured a Mack, that rounded nose and the dog standing guard above the grille. At its mid-century peak, the Allentown complex sprawled across 47 acres. The assembly line turned out around 135 trucks every single day, and somewhere near 18,000 people drew a paycheck from Mack. Think about what that meant for one city. Mack workers earned good wages, the kind that bought a house and a car and sent the children to college. Entire Allentown neighborhoods were built for them. There were streets named for the company. Mack sponsored the Little League teams and the bowling leagues, and the company picnic filled an amusement park with 10,000 people on a summer afternoon. Mack was not just a company in Allentown. Mack was Allentown. A man could leave high school, walk through the gate, and know with quiet certainty that he would retire from that same plant 47 years later, and that his son could do the same. The trucks themselves had become legend. The workhorse of that era, the B-61, could haul 20 tons day after day without complaint, and stories circulated through the industry, true stories of Mack trucks racking up 1,000,000 miles without a major overhaul. A construction company would buy a Mack, run it 15 years, sell it used, and the second owner would run it another 10. Stop and think about that business, because the men who ran Mack never quite did. They were building trucks so durable that the trucks cannibalized their own replacement sales. A cynical company would have built in obsolescence, made a truck that wore out in 5 years and needed buying again. Mack built trucks that lasted 20, and they saw that not as a problem, but as the whole point. If your truck outlasts every rival's truck, the customer always comes back to you. For a long time, that was true. And that very pride, that certainty about what a truck was for, was the seed of everything that came after. The trouble started so small that no one inside the plant felt it. In the early 1960s, a few hundred German trucks a year began trickling into the American market. Daimler-Benz, then Volvo out of Sweden, then Scania. Nobody at Mack worried. European trucks were built for European roads and European fuel. They would never work here. Except they did. The fleet managers who tried them found them quieter, more efficient, easier to maintain, with parts that were the same across the whole model line, so a garage did not have to stock 1,000 different pieces. The engineering was precise in ways the American trucks were not. It did not show up in the sales numbers at first. Mack still dominated. But the men who actually paid the fuel bills started talking to each other. Here is the mistake that mattered, and it was not a mistake of engineering. It was a mistake of imagination. Mack's leaders were men who had built their whole lives and the whole company on toughness. When customers began to value fuel efficiency over raw power, Mack did not see a market shifting. They saw a betrayal of what a truck was supposed to be. Internal memos from those years, made public later in court, show Mack executives dismissing the European trucks as over-engineered for American roads and too expensive for American buyers. They were wrong on both counts. The European trucks were not over-engineered. They were engineered for a different thing, for the cost of running a truck over 10 years, rather than the brute weight it could carry in a day. And once you counted fuel and maintenance and resale value, they were not more expensive at all. They were cheaper. Mack's leaders could not see it or did not want to because the whole meaning of the bulldog was at stake. Then the world made the point for them. When the oil embargo of 1973 sent diesel prices tripling in a matter of months, the thing that had been a quiet preference became a hard law of survival. Trucking companies ran on thin margins in the best of times, and now fuel was their largest single cost. A Mack that got 8 miles to the gallon was suddenly a machine that lost money against a European or Japanese truck getting 12 or 13. The sales did not slip. They fell off a cliff. Within 2 years, Mack's truck sales had roughly halved. The Allentown plant dropped from running near capacity to a single shift, and the layoffs began. First 1,000 men, then 2,000 more. The union fought every cut, negotiated every buyout, but the arithmetic was merciless. If you sell half as many trucks, you need half as many hands to build them. And even as Mack reeled from the fuel shock, the ground was shifting again beneath it in a way that toughness could not answer. The big trucking companies were no longer buying one truck at a time. They were buying fleets, dozens or hundreds of identical machines, and they ran them on a calculation that weighed fuel and repairs and downtime and resale value all together. They did not want a truck that lasted 20 years. They wanted one they could run hard for 5 and then trade for a newer one with better mileage. Mack had spent a century perfecting the opposite truck. Freightliner undercut it on price. The European makers beat it on running cost, and the premium builders took the owner-operators who wanted something custom. Mack was left in the middle, not cheap enough, not thrifty enough, not special enough, and the middle is the one place in any market where there is nothing left to hold on to. Mack finally admitted it had a problem, and it reached for a lifeline that would slowly become a noose. In 1979, the company let the French automaker Renault buy a stake, trading access to the American dealer network for access to European engineering and fuel-efficient engines. On paper, it made sense. In practice, the two companies never fit. Renault was state-owned, bureaucratic, driven as much by French politics as by business. Mack was a scrappy American outfit founded by 5 brothers with borrowed tools. The cultures ground against each other from the start. And while they ground, Renault's stake only grew from 1/10 of the company to nearly half, to outright control. By the middle of the 1980s, the decisions about Allentown were being made in Paris. And the men in Paris looked at the Allentown plant and saw not a cathedral of American industry, but a problem. The factory had been started at the turn of the century and added onto piece by piece for 80 years, until it was a maze of buildings connected by tunnels and conveyors. Moving a single chassis from one end to the other meant running it through 6 different buildings. Labor costs ran high, because union contracts written in the prosperous 1950s guaranteed wages and benefits that now sat above the industry average. The plant was profitable, but only barely, and only when it ran full. When sales dropped, those fixed costs became a stone around the company's neck. A study commissioned in those years found the old plant running at a fraction of the efficiency of a modern factory, and concluded what the numbers had been whispering for a decade. Close Allentown. Build the trucks somewhere cheaper. The announcement came, and the place they chose was Winnsboro, South Carolina, where the land was cheap, the unions were weak, and an $80 million plant had been laid out for modern assembly. Allentown would be wound down. The reaction in the Lehigh Valley was fury and disbelief. Mack had been in the city for more than 80 years. 3 generations of the same families had worked there. Men had started on the line at 18 and retired at 65 without ever drawing a paycheck from anyone else. The union fought. They held rallies, offered wage freezes, begged to keep the plant open. The city offered tax breaks. The governor of Pennsylvania offered state money. The answer was no. The decision was already made. And here is the cruelest part, the part the men on the line never quite got to say out loud. The end did not come with a ceremony. There was no last truck signed by every worker on the final shift, no crowd of thousands gathered in the parking lot to watch it leave. On a Wednesday in October of 1987, the last truck simply rolled off the venerable Allentown assembly line without fanfare, and a 62-year-old plant went quiet, and roughly 1,800 jobs ended. The line that had built the trucks that won 2 world wars stopped, and most of America did not look up. The bulldog did not die in a battle. It died in a memo, signed in a language the men who built it could not read. The slow part came after. Renault itself was struggling, losing money and propped up by its own government, and in the year 2000 it sold its truck business, Mack included, to the Swedish company Volvo. So the brand that had been born in a Brooklyn stable, that 5 German-speaking brothers had built with borrowed tools, now answered to Gothenburg. In 2009, what was left of Mack's headquarters left Allentown entirely, moving south to Greensboro, North Carolina, where the rest of the parent company's American offices already sat. The old buildings on the Allentown site, the foundry, the assembly halls, the tunnels, were too old and too contaminated to save, and in time, most of them came down. Plans were drawn for a technology park, for mixed-use development, for adaptive reuse. None of it quite happened. Today, part of the ground is a parking lot, and part is fenced off and going back to weeds. And if you know where to look, you can still find the rail lines rusting in the pavement where they once hauled raw steel into the heart of the plant. A small corner of what survives holds the Mack Trucks Historical Museum, kept alive by volunteers and visited by a few thousand people a year, most of them old enough to remember when the bulldog still barked on the line. Mack Trucks still exists. That is the strange afterlife of it. The brand belongs to the Volvo Group, and trucks wearing the Mack name and the bulldog are still built about 10 miles from the old plant in a clean, modern, profitable factory in Macungie, Pennsylvania. But it is not the same company, and it is not close. The new plant employs a fraction of what Allentown did. The trucks are good, but they are designed in Sweden and powered by Swedish engineering, assembled largely by robots. By workers who mostly were not born when the Allentown line was in its prime and who have no thread of memory connecting them to the men who made the bulldog mean something. The hood ornament is still there, bolted to the front of every truck. But it is decoration now, where it used to be a promise. The story of Mack is usually told as a simple tale of foreign competition, of cheaper imports and globalization swallowing an American giant, and there is truth in that. But it is not the whole truth, and the whole truth is harder. Mack did not fall because Volvo or Mercedes or Renault built a better truck. Mack fell because at the moment the world changed, it mistook its own identity for its strategy. Toughness was who Mack was, and so when the market began to ask for efficiency, Mack heard the request as an insult and refused to answer it. Volvo had no such pride to defend. When customers wanted fuel economy, Volvo built fuel economy. When they wanted safety, Volvo built safety. Volvo listened. Mack preached. And in the end, the market does not buy sermons. It buys trucks. There is a second lesson buried under the first, quieter and sadder. Even if Mack had adapted faster, even if it had built an efficient truck in the 1970s instead of clinging to the old ones, the company might still have been swallowed because the whole American truck industry was consolidating, and independence was becoming impossible to afford. But Allentown might have lived. The plant might still be running, maybe not at 18,000 workers, but at 5,000 or 6,000, enough to keep the heart of a city beating. If only the decisions had still been made by people who had to drive past the factory on their way home. They were not. They were made by men an ocean away, weighing the Lehigh Valley against a global spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet a parking lot in Pennsylvania did not have a number worth saving. Stand in that parking lot today, where the foundry used to throw heat you could feel across the street, and it is cracked asphalt and chain link and weeds. The old headquarters still stands behind the fence, dark and empty, and no one has quite decided what to do with it. Allentown is a larger city now than it was when Mack ran 3 shifts. But the people who left were replaced by people who came for cheap rent, not good work. And the neighborhoods the Mack men built are still standing, while the people inside them stock warehouses and answer phones for a fraction of what a place on that assembly line once paid. The houses remember the wages even when the city has forgotten how it earned them. There is no tidy moral here, no single villain to hang it on. Mack died for 100 reasons, some of them avoidable and most of them not. It built trucks that lasted too long. It stayed loyal to a factory that grew too costly. It believed in strength when the market had quietly started paying for thrift. It fought to stay its own master until the day it could not. Maybe the only honest lesson is the oldest one. Nothing lasts forever. Not a company, not a factory, not the industry that gives a whole city its name and its pride and its paycheck. The bulldog barked for 100 years, which is longer than almost anything an American business ever manages. But the silence that followed is the part that the old men in the Allentown diners still talk about, as if the plant closed yesterday instead of a lifetime ago. Because what they lost was never really the trucks. It was the idea behind them. The idea that a company could carry a city for a century, that 5 brothers with 47 borrowed dollars and a stable that smelled of horses could build something that outlived them by generations. That making things, real things, heavy things that other men needed, could hold a community together and give an ordinary working life a shape and a dignity and a place to belong. That is what went quiet on a Wednesday in 1987. Not a brand. a way of believing that the work you did with your hands could last. If you remember Mack, or a town like Allentown, I would like to hear it. Maybe your father came home smelling of the foundry, or maybe you drove one of those trucks until the odometer rolled past numbers it was never built to reach. Maybe you still live on a street named for a company that no longer makes anything there. Tell us in the comments the place, the years, and what the work meant to the people who did it. These stories only survive when the people who lived them write them down. Subscribe and help us keep the record straight while the men who remember the bulldog are still here to tell us what it sounded like in the cold.